Hey everybody, it's Dr. Stephanie Aldrich, the Habit Master, author of The Habit Formula Life Success Equation. And through my personal journey of self-help and personal development over the course of the last 3 years, I have discovered what's called the spiritual awakening. And this term might be a little hippy-dippy or, whoa, she's getting, a little out there kind of thing. But basically what it translates to is that you're aware. You're aware that the beliefs that you have might not be 100% factual, might not be the way that it should be to get you what you want. It might be that the advice that you've been given during your lifetime, the way that you've been brought up, the things that you've done during your life, there's other people out there. There's other ideas, there's other environments, there's other ways of doing things. And I think the whole basis for a spiritual awakening is that you're more aware of things. You're aware that, hey, I don't know everything. The older you get, I think the more you have the ability to look around your environment and say, hey, take a step back, and am I living the life that I want to live? Have I accomplished what I want to accomplish? You think back in your 20s and your teens and you're like, I want to go conquer the world. When you're a kid, you want to be a firefighter or a famous singer or a ballet dancer or, a rocket man, right? And as we develop our reasoning and our logic skills, our creativity and our imagination kind of fade out. And we kind of get ourselves in a certain path of behaving, of acting, of thinking. And those dreams, those desires that we had as children kind of go off and kind of fade into the sunset because the people around us, the environment that we are, our past experiences, our failures, kind of tell us, hey, maybe we need to be a little more logical about this, a little bit more responsible. When are you going to be responsible? You got to earn money. Now you have a family. You got to take care of business, right? I think the older we get, and I know I've been going through this, I don't know if it's my midlife crisis or what, but I've become more aware of the things that I think about, the beliefs that I have, the way that I treat people, and also my self-limiting beliefs. How far can I go? During these next 3 videos, I want to share with you different ideas on how to awaken your consciousness, on how to develop the ideas that are around you. There's so many unique and wonderful people and ideas that are around us. And you know what? We don't know what our potential is. This is an easy way to become aware, to look around at our environment and say, hey, I can change the way I am or the way that I behave and get control of how I want to live my life. I hope you guys learned something today, and don't be afraid of these spiritual awakening or the consciousness awakening words. It's just a bunch of terminology that people say just to make themselves feel good, right? It's all about awareness, okay? If you want to get a copy of my book, you can get one for free. The first chapter is all about awareness, and that is the first step to changing the bad habits. So go to thehabitformulabook.com and grab your copy today. Enjoy these videos.
going through a spiritual awakening. I'll share with you ways of knowing whether you're going through that process or not and what you can expect from it. Welcome back to another video. My name is Aaron and I help people expand their consciousness. Now in this video we're going to be specifically talking about spiritual awakening and how we can know we're really going through the process. Like, what are some signposts that we can have? What are some signs that we can have to know whether we're on that right track or not? Now, I'll say the first one I'll give away right now has to do with just simply knowing that you are watching this video. Now, that was one of the first signs for me, is when I was going through the process, was shortly after I learned meditation, and I found myself, just if I was online, I would just start to see things about spiritual awakening. And it was something that I never really, even came across before. Maybe I heard the words before, but it never really resonated with me. So understand first off that if you're even watching this video, there's a high likelihood that in order for you to even perceive of this video, you're already vibrating, quote unquote vibrating, at that understanding, and you're resonating with this idea and this type of experience. So that's empowering to know, because you're on the path already. You may have just not known it 100%, but now from this point going forward, you can start to integrate that more and more into your life. I remember that I was, when I learned meditation, it was something I just did because I thought it would help me with what I thought I had ADHD, which means it was hard for me to focus, so I took Adderall, which is the prescription drug that they give for it. So I took that for years, and then I didn't like the side effects of Adderall, which were that you couldn't eat very much and you couldn't sleep very much. So then I learned meditation, and the game changer was like 3 days in of learning meditation. I learned how to observe my thoughts rather than try to control them, and when I did that, I got into this feeling that completely changed everything. I started to feel so different about who I was. I started to have very deep realizations for the correlation between my thinking and what I was experiencing in my life. So I became aware of the limitation I had around thinking I had ADHD, and how, thinking I had to go to the doctor to cure that, or I had to take Adderall to cure that, how that was feeding into that reality, and how I could simply change it by redefining myself. So instead of having ADHD, I defined myself as having a lot of energy and having to ground it in. So that's what I did. From that point going forward, I never took Adderall again. And that was, I think, one of the purposes. A lot of people that have been through a lot of pain in life, have been through a lot of things in life, go through a spiritual awakening. I know that even growing up, I went through a lot of, you may have heard me talk about this before, and I won't go too deep into it, but I went through a lot of abuse growing up from my ex-stepmom. And from that made me go within, because for years I asked myself the question, why did this have to happen to me? And years later, I went through that spiritual awakening. I was able to let go of all that resistance, and that, I believe, was one of the purposes of it. So I kind of transmuted all of that in a very powerful way. So the first sign that you are going through a spiritual awakening is that you are simply watching this video, that you find yourself resonating with this kind of information, and that you're starting to integrate it more into your daily life. Now, the second one has to do with being able to read people and being able to see intention in everything that you do. Now, what I mean by this is, maybe before, like, people would do things to you, or people would say things to you, and you would just listen to the words that they say. But what happens is, after a spiritual awakening, you become aware of not just the practical, like, physical or the words themselves. You become aware of the energy underneath the words. So I became very sensitive and aware of people's intentions. If somebody was trying to get something out of me, it was like clear as day. It was just there. I could see it, and I was very aware of what their intentions were. I find that you become a little bit more empathic. You're able to read people at a much deeper level, and it's powerful though, because you become aware of where to put your energy. If somebody comes up to you and they want something from you, and you can tell that they're coming from a good space, then you can do what you want with it. But if someone comes up to you and maybe they're looking to manipulate you, you can also read in between the lines there. Now, another part of this, of course, is I had the stepmom that was the way she was, so I learned manipulation at a very young age. But I'd say that after spiritual awakening, it was just so easy for me to see. I was just so aware of what people's thoughts were and like what people's intentions were, and then I could simply decide where I wanted to put my energy and really who I wanted to be around. So realize it's not just about the words that are said, it's not just about the physicality of things, it's also about the energy underneath it. And one of the other parts of this is also knowing that you are more than just this physical life, that you are an immortal spiritual being having a temporary human experience. So what this means is you just become aware and sensitive to the idea that this isn't all there is. You become more aware of your dreams, you become more aware of your connection to what we could call spirit, and that is what a spiritual awakening is. It's realizing that there's so much more than just the ego perspective, than the senses. I mean, think about it. We have the five senses. The five senses are arguably six senses, but the idea is that we perceive vibration with these senses. Now, there's more vibration than we can even perceive, because you could think of this in the way that we can hear, but when we hear, there's sounds that dogs can hear that we can't hear. Doesn't mean that those sounds don't exist. It just means it's out of our vibrational range of interpretation. So same with sight. There's X-ray, there's different infrared, there's different ways of seeing things, but we see using our eyes the way that we do. And some people can see auras and some other people may not be able to, but it's all left to perception. So if that's the only 5 ways or 6 ways that we are able to interpret reality, then we can become aware that there's so much more than we're consciously aware of, and it becomes very empowering, because then it kind of expands our bubble or expands what we think to be true, and from that point going forward, you start to understand things at a much deeper level. The third sign that you are going through a spiritual awakening has to do with just completely redefining all of the limitations and definitions that you have. This is kind of related to the first two, but when you become aware of what you believe to be true, you then become aware of what's a self-fulfilling prophecy in your life. So I remember that I just became aware of all the correlation between what I was thinking to what I was achieving in my life, or what I was receiving in my life. And from that, I was able to let go of a lot of limitations. Limitations such as, I'm not worthy, or limitations having to do around having the ADHD, or limitations around like a certain amount of money that I can only make per year. A lot of this also has to do with the subconscious mind, but when we become aware of what the subconscious mind is doing, or when we become aware of a habit that we have, it's no longer a habit, it then becomes a choice. So then that's where the conscious awareness comes in. You'll find that you start to become more aware of who you have become. One of the most powerful things you can do for this is to ask yourself the question, is this true? Does this have to be true for me? When you see that everything in life is perception. Think of it like this. Everything in life is true. The words that we use, the things and perceptions that we have and opinions we have are what we impose on it. So for example, we could think of the idea of water and the idea of good, right? Water is just water. Water just is what it is, right? Good is an idea. It may be an opinion, but good is just, it is what it is. When we say water is good, is connecting these two ideas together, and it's making a perception. It's making a perspective. We are constantly doing that in imposing these ideas on reality. Some can be better than others. I mean, obviously water is good, or that's one perception of it, but water might not be good to somebody that's maybe drowning, right? So it depends upon the perspective that you have. So the reason I'm saying this is because when you become aware of the fact that everything in your life is an opinion, it's one perspective, one reference experience, you can start to expand your own bubble, and you can start to become much more aware of who you are and who you define to be.
Whatever the event is, a spiritual awakening just simply means, however it started doesn't matter, but what it means is that you become aware of something deeper. As you're going through the spiritual awakening process, there is a statement that starts to play out. Whether you know that consciously or not, it's playing out in you. And this is the statement. The statement is this. You come to a point in your life where you start thinking, subconsciously or consciously, this. There must be something more than this. There must be something more than this, all right? As soon as you start thinking about this consciously or subconsciously, that's what I call a triggering awakening, okay? The trigger of the awakening. Now, eventually, we can start talking about it on a more deeper sense, what an awakening means on a deeper sense. As you start becoming aware of the deeper meaning of life, of the underpinnings of life, You become connected to what some call God or source energy. You become connected with everything around you. You experience what spiritual teachers talk about when they say that everything is oneness, the oneness of life. You start actually experiencing this individually, where before you didn't even know what the heck these teachers were saying. All right? So you start to experience the connection of life. Eventually, spiritual awakening means that you are going to come face to face with your own divinity. I love that definition of spiritual awakening. A spiritual awakening is when I come face to face with my own divinity. Now, at this point, you may be saying, that sounds great, sign me up. What's the problem? And you're right, there is no problem. I actually wish a spiritual awakening on everyone on this planet because I think it's the best thing that could ever happen to you. But there's a flip side to that, all right? There's always a flip side to everything. So when the spiritual awakening process occurs, when it starts, when it activates, and you come face to face with your own divinity, when you come face to face with that divinity, really it's light, when you come face to face with that intensity of light, you automatically are forced to shed all of the bullshit that you've been telling yourself and others. You're forced to shed all of the lies, all of the masks that you've put on, that you've presented yourself in the world with. You have to shed everything. You have to shed your childhood wounds. You have to shed everything that everyone has ever done to you and what you've done to them. You have to shed all of your judgments that you have towards yourself and towards others. You have to shed all of your emotional baggage. So coming face to face with this intensity of light requires you to shed everything that is untrue about you, everything that has blocked you in life up until now. And it's this shedding process that can be tremendously difficult to navigate at times, okay? So there's the broader definition of a spiritual awakening. Eventually, what the spiritual awakening process is doing is that it is bringing you closer and closer and closer, all parts of you, to a connection, a unison, a wholeness. So at some point, as you're coming face to face with your divinity, face to face with your light, and you're dealing with all of the parts of you that you have rejected, that you have ignored, that you didn't want to look at, that you thought were resolved, as you come face to face with what psychologist Carl Jung called the shadow, and the shadow doesn't mean that you're a bad person or is a bad part of you. The shadow is just the parts of us that we disown, the parts of us that we don't like, the parts of us that we reject, that we don't see, the parts of us that we didn't even know existed that were in us. So that's what Carl Jung called the shadow. And in the awakening process, that shadow is brought to the light also. Eventually, what the spiritual awakening process does is it brings you into a state of union, of wholeness, so you're not fragmented anymore. And when you step forward in life from a position of wholeness, you're so much more powerful, you're filled with joy, you're radiating energy, and that's how you help change the world, by changing yourself, and then you change the world, and life becomes miraculous. Okay?